Let's get into it on players we disagree with the market on. We are looking at DraftKings ADP for this exercise. Player 1, Ashton Jeanty. We are at 14 overall on DraftKings. ADP is 8.3. This is an interesting one. A lot of people say, how could you have a rookie 14th overall? Look at what happened to Marvin Harrison last year. I don't think that's really a good argument. We have Ashton Jeanty, I believe, for the 4th most carries in the NFL, behind only Bijan, Saquon, and Derrick Henry. We are not underestimating his usage at all. I think the gap here, Leone, is more related to what people expect from Raiders offense as a whole versus what sharp or betting market stuff expects from the Raiders market, from the Raiders team and offense as a whole this year. Leone, maybe talk a little to the people about why you think we're behind here on Mr. Jeanty.
Yeah, as you noted, it's definitely not a rookie bias. We have plenty of volume going towards Jeanty, one of the highest rush shares in the entire league we're projecting. And historically, if you look at really high-end running back prospects, which Jeanty is, who get the draft capital, they're really good investments. I think it's a little different this year for 2 reasons that kind of blend together. One, you mentioned the Raiders offense. Their average team total for the season is about 20. Not a great playoff schedule either. They're expected to be trailing in a lot of these games, so it's hard to just thrust a whole ton of rushing volume on the team overall, which aren't like major red flags in and of themselves. But when you compare Jeanty to what is, in my opinion, one of the better first rounds that we've had in a long time at the position, you look at the other running backs that go ahead of him: Barkley, Bijan Robinson, CMC, Jahmyr Gibbs. These are guys that either catch a lot of balls or are highly efficient rushers on teams with much better scoring expectations than the Raiders. And then you look at the pass catchers, you've got the stalwarts up top, that obviously you're not taking him above in Chase and Jefferson, CD. But then in full PPR, like Puka and Amon-Ra are extremely safe with a high ceiling. And then you get the younger guys that come this time next year could be top 5 picks in Nico Collins, Malik Neighbors, year 2 player that had an awesome rookie season, Brian Thomas, year 2 player that had an awesome rookie season. You even compare Jeanty to his teammate Brock Bowers, who had one of the best, probably the best tight end season of all time, and he can really start to separate even more from his peers in a full PPR format. It's just really tough competition in the first round more than it is that we don't like Jeanty.
Yeah, so Herzig, when you're building a big portfolio, how comfortable are you with this position? I mean, if you follow the rank straight, you're going to end up with no Jeanty. How are you handling this Jeanty rank versus ADP right now on DK?
Yeah, it's really difficult because for him to completely burn you, you really need to him to be the RB1. And being on a team with such a low total, didn't have that many, receptions in college in his later years. Yes, earlier on he did. We know he has that in his skill set, but just any running back in a new offense, you don't know how they're going to be utilized. So he needs to get that pass catching volume because he's not going to make up for it with touchdowns. And then when I'm comparing him to the other players around, as Leone was saying, but even just on the running back position, for me, Christian McCaffrey, it doesn't need, he's just got to be healthy. And he has that running back 1 season in his books, especially on a PPR site, where Jeanty, it's just for further reach. So for me, I'm just getting very, very little of him. Now, maybe if you if he falls a little past ADP, I'll try to grab him to get some unique combinations at the back end of the draft, but I'm not trying to target him, and I'll probably end up with something around 2 to 4% exposure if he stays where he is on DraftKings at 8.3.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I will say, a bull case for Jeanty is I think the Chip Kelly stuff, they'll run more plays per game. Chip Kelly has been run heavy, and he has been up-tempo, right? Certainly that's good for Jeanty. The tape bros love Jeanty as a pass catcher for what it's worth. But on the negative side, Leone mentioned the playoff schedule. Week 15 at the Eagles, one of the most difficult matchups. Week 16 at the Texans, one of the most difficult matchups. And then week 17, championship week, is a home game against the Giants, which is a pretty good spot there for the Raiders. So I hate to be get none of him, but if the market's going to just completely go nuts here, ADP again is 8.3 on Jeanty. It's going to be tough to get there. Let's go to a underdog specific one here. We're also behind on DraftKings on this one, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, we're ahead on both. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 25 overall on underdog. ADP is 30.5. And we're also ahead here on DraftKings. Obviously, Leone, DK Metcalf is gone. Tyler Lockett is gone. they've been replaced by Cooper Kupp. And we can do Cooper Kupp together here because as I said, we are ahead on JSN and we are behind on Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, we are 106 overall on DraftKings. ADP is 81. These changing situations, the only are ones that I feel like we should have a bigger edge on. We should be better than other people at evaluating new situations. Leone, what do you think about JSN and Seahawks pass game?
Yeah, Silva was all over JSN last year, sort of being willing to overlook that tough rookie season. And his yards per out run goes from, I think, like in the 1.3s, which is below average, all the way up north of 2 last year. So huge breakout for him, kind of combining volume with some efficiency. You look at him versus Kupp, they're just going different ways in terms of career trajectory. Kupp is 32, hasn't played a full season since 2021. His yards per out run was actually pretty similar to JSN's last year, but he's getting force-fed targets to get there. His yards per target's a lot worse. So especially if you're talking, underdog specific here with a half PPR site, it's tougher bet for Kupp to get there, needing that efficiency, and JSN can give you both. So really just taking on the younger player. Do think both could see a lot of targets, especially early. We could see more 2 wide receiver sets, which are typically good for targets per out run for both of the wide receivers. But yeah, we're much more comfortable, even at the much more expensive cost, being in on JSN than Kupp.
Yeah, I mean, JSN is the kind of player, Herzig, that I prefer on DraftKings full PPR. We've seen a low ADOT from him in multiple schemes. You can get these 8 for 70-yard games that are very usable on DraftKings, or 10 catches, 90 yards, no touchdowns on DraftKings that are very usable. Any thoughts on handling JSN and Kupp here, Herzig?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason where, it's who are the wide receivers that are going around him. And the market seems to be a little higher than us on guys like Tyreek, who has the age cliff, has the injuries, has the kind of prima donna. I think you then have someone like Terry McLaurin, who on DraftKings never really had that high of a target share, never really going to get that much volume. I'd rather have him on someone like underdog. Even Marvin Harrison Jr. is ahead of him, someone who we're hoping makes that second-year leap when we just saw JSN make that leap. So I think that's where, for me, I like JSN above those guys. I will throw out there, though, I do have a little playoff concerns aspects with the Seahawks, where if they're out of contention, Sam Darnold's not doing well, do they then go to the third-round rookie? And if that's the case, you don't want to be in a passing offense with Milrose, your QB.
And I have concerns about that too. And that's why I've tried, I'm not trying to get ahead of market. I'm not trying to get ahead of my exposure on JSN because I'm worried Sam Darnold could turn into a pumpkin, man. I'm real worried when you leave Kevin O'Connell, you leave Justin Jefferson, you leave the dome, you leave that setup. Sam Darnold could faceplant in a big way, as Herzig mentioned, could be ugly for him. Now, we'll see. But yeah, there's a little bit of risk there for me in JSN. Last thing I'll say is on the Kupp stuff, I'm fine with where we are on Kupp. I mean, Kupp and Matthew Stafford, they were boys. Kupp and Sean McVay, they were boys. Cooper Kupp is a Rams legend, Super Bowl MVP 4 years ago. And then they just give him the cold shoulder. I mean, they don't even make an effort on contract or anything. They just stone cold gave up on Cooper Kupp, and they know him better than anyone, and they're boys. That was a big red flag for me with the way the Rams handled the Cooper Kupp situation. All right. Let's go to Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin, we are at 34 overall on DraftKings. His ADP is 26.7. In the player-by-player notes, hopefully you guys are checking those out if you're a Best Ball subscriber. It was just kind of simple to me why we are behind market. He had 13 touchdowns on 82 catches last year, which is just completely unsustainable, and they add Debo. To me, it's that simple, right? If you can't take him, you can, but 26 overall is very steep, I think, for McLaurin, given those two things. Leone, what else do you think about Terry McLaurin here?
Yeah, just putting some numbers to what you said. He had a 22% target share last year, 20% in 2023, 21.7% in 2022. He's just not a player that commands a ton of volume, and it's an offense that projects for a below average amount of passing attempts. And you put those two things together at the 2-3 turn, you're going to really have to hit on those touchdowns again that are likely to regress. And it's not a strong bet, in our opinion, when you can find wide receivers that are more assured, closer to a 25% target share in offenses that are going to throw more.
Yeah, I just think it's really hard to get burned at a 26 ADP by Terry McLaurin. Herzig, how are you handling McLaurin so far?
Yeah, let me get my volume on him on Underdog, where on Underdog it matches up from a format wise. We're a bit more touchdown dependent. And you can usually get Terry and Jayden Daniels as a stack in the third, fourth round over an Underdog. And that's also a place where I'm more happy to grab an elite QB. So that makes sense. I don't want to be taking the elite QB as much on DraftKings. I don't want to be taking Terry McLaurin at that 26.7. I feel like this is a point of the draft where people are just like, oh, I need a wide receiver. Who do I get? And they're kind of just reaching and pulling him up, where if you go wide receiver in the first round, maybe you end up grabbing like a Trey McBride in the second or something. Another one like, hey, running back in that early third looks a little better.
Yeah, for
Rashee
sure.
Rice too, over these guys that we've been talking about. His ADP has a chance to really rise over the offseason.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point on the McLaurin, Jayden Daniels stacking stuff. More, the touchdown correlation between those two guys. If they hit for a really high touchdown rate again, that will pull you further ahead on Underdog also. All right. Number 4, Marvin Harrison. This is Underdog specific. We're at 35 overall on Underdog. His ADP is 26.1. I think people just like kind of don't put any context around rookie year stats. Yes, Marvin Harrison had 62 catches, 885 yards, 8 touchdowns as a rookie. If you project some type of standard year 2 leap, it looks pretty good. However, he came in with these massive expectations. His role was way bigger than most rookies get. The usage was just so brutal. Pin him to one side, no screens, no quick hitters. Ask Marvin Harrison to win contested catches over and over again, jump balls. The coaches are the same. The quarterback is the same. I'm worried nothing is going to change, and people are assuming that it will. So I normally want to bet on year 2 breakouts at wide receiver Leone. This one just feels different to me. Any more thoughts on us being behind on Marvin Harrison?
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about JSN having that bad rookie year and then breaking out in a huge way year 2. So there's definitely hope for Marvin Harrison, who was at 1.7 yards per out run, meaningfully better than JSN was at. But as you said, the really high expectations. He was thrust into a ton of volume in a really big role, which in some ways, could excuse the efficiency not quite being there. But the market is really just buying into it with such full force that's the part we're having trouble with. It's not that we don't think it can happen. It's just that we're not assuming it's going to happen with a 100% probability. You've also got Trey McBride like further establishing himself as the alpha in this offense. There's definitely room for 2, but it's not a good thing for Marvin Harrison. He's really going to have to get that catch rate up. Only caught 55% of his targets last year. That particularly hurts on a full PPR site like DK.
One interesting thing, Herzig, is that we are ahead of market on DraftKings, like on Kyler Murray. People have given up on Kyler Murray. You can get him around pick 100 pretty often on Kyler Murray, but I've been getting him more with my Trey McBride stuff, specifically on DraftKings. Leone, Herzig, how are you handling Marvin Harrison this year?
One thing that I'm always looking for in drafts and ADP is there like a non-projections factor that's impacting ADP? And I think this is a great example, especially when you're talking Underdog, where people are kind of, especially drafting now, focused on week 17. But you have the Cincinnati-Arizona matchup. And that Cincinnati-Arizona matchup is saying, hey, you can get Jamar Chase early at the beginning. You can get T. Higgins at that 2-3. Hey, why don't we throw Marvin Harrison there as well? And so I think that's a major reason why people are like, oh, I want to stack Marvin with the T, with the Jamar, or maybe I guess if you grab Chase Brown in the 2-3 there. But the idea being that's dragging him up more than kind of his projection should be. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't take him in those situations if you want, if you're trying to build for that week 17. I think it's probably overplayed a bit from a correlation angle. And now you're getting something that's not as unique and you're overpaying for the player. So I don't love it, but I think it's good to be aware of where these factors come in. And I think this is a clear example.
Yeah, Leone, we should actually stop here for a second, talk about this week 17 stuff. I feel like you are the founder of this, where it's gone completely nuts on week 17. Even you, who I believe is still firmly on week 17 correlation, would you recommend reaching above our rank to execute a week 17 game stack with Bengals and Marvin Harrison?
That's not typically the way I draft like that early in, we're talking pretty early ADPs to manipulate that. I think weeks 15 and 16 still matter in a lot of these pod formats, and people, for the most part, just completely ignore that. So the week 17 stack is important, getting that game stack, but so weeks 15 and 16 are undervalued. And just on a relative basis, I think people at times can be overdoing it. And there's this self-fulfilling thing, like Herzig said, where some people start doing it, the ADP starts shifting, people draft on the ADPs, and then it can get out of hand.
And then it's not unique, right? I mean, if a lot of people are doing it and then the ADP starts to line up, then it's not even unique, which was, part of the thesis in the first place. All right. Number 5, Kyren Williams. We were at 38 overall. ADP is 30.8 on DraftKings. I'm having a hard time with this, man, because every offseason it seems like the rhetoric is we want to take some work off Kyren. He hasn't been that efficient. He had some fumble issues, but no matter what, when the game is on the line, when the chips are down, Sean McVay seems to always go back to Kyren, even though they used a round 3 pick on Blake Corum last year, even though they used a round 4 pick on Jarquez Hunter this year. So I'm having a hard time with Kyren Williams right now. Leone, what are your thoughts on us being behind market on him?
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to whether or not you believe he can lose his job without an injury. We think there's some risk there still, even though he's been able to hold off, Blake Corum last year. So we bake in a little bit of that risk. It is a profile that's somewhat fragile. It's very dependent upon the offense around him and him getting those touches. He only had an 8% target share last year. Talking DraftKings, full PPR site, that's an issue. In terms of yards per carry, he's been pretty much league average. It's, so it's basically counting on him getting a lot of carries and a lot of touchdowns. We're going to talk about Joe Mixon later on the mix, and it's going to be kind of like a similar conversation when we get to him. So I don't think it's like an awful play. I see the upside, particularly in the playoff rounds, if he does get that 100-yard bonus with multiple TDs. But overall, would kind of rather continue to build up pass catchers at this point.
Yeah, and I've been getting a decent amount of Corum and Jarquez Hunter so far. Herzig, it makes me a little queasy, though, because like I said, McVay is in love with Kyren, or at least has been for the last couple years. Herzig, how are you thinking about Rams' backfield?
Yeah, I mean, barring injury, I think the most likely outcome is Kyren's just the starting running back again. And he has a similar year to what he's had the past. And at the end of the day, he probably actually ends up with something like a better value than what he's drafted at, maybe a 3rd rounder. But the chance of him becoming like a top 3 running back, like that elite, I think is very minimal, just he doesn't have that talent. But now we have to take into account the additional risk. And I think even though I said, yes, I think the most likely outcome is that he is, barring injury, that starter. We've heard it with Corum. We've seen it with the drafting now, Jarquez Hunter. And that's not to say one of these two is going to take Kyren's role, but I think it's very, plausible that Hunter plays a bit more of a kind of lightning to the thunder of Kyren. And maybe you have Corum who actually, hey, if Kyren does keep this fumbling issue up, Corum is a legitimate replacement. There's just a bit too many question marks, and the upside isn't there for me to want to take on that risk at where he's being drafted in the 3rd round.
Yeah, and I mean, there are certainly other backs available right around him. You can go Chase Brown. You can go Josh Jacobs. You can go Bucky Irving. You can go James Cook. You can go Breece Hall. All are kind of in that similar range there if you're uncomfortable with Kyren. All right, let's go to an interesting one here, Leone. DK Metcalf, we are at 45 overall. ADP is 54.8. I guess the first question that people will ask is, are we assuming Aaron Rodgers is going to sign here with the Pittsburgh Steelers? If he doesn't, their current starting quarterback is Mason Rudolph. They have Will Howard. I mean, they have the worst quarterback room in the league. My assumption has been that Aaron Rodgers will end up signing with the Steelers. It's starting to get kind of late. They have a mandatory minicamp coming up here, I believe, next week, which we'll find out hopefully more. But again, I've been playing it as if Aaron Rodgers will sign with the Steelers. Leone, how are you thinking about DK Metcalf right now with Aaron Rodgers stuff still in limbo?
Yeah, I mean, we're building in some chance that Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback here, but in a lot of ways, that's not the main reason we're ahead of market on him. We honestly were very low on George Pickens last year, and we almost got burned a little bit by it. If you look at his first 12 games or so before he had gotten hurt, he was averaging a target share of 27% in this offense, much higher than I expected. I think DK Metcalf's a better wide receiver, but part of the reasons we survived Pickens is end of season, got injured, had some issues. 1, Two, the team did go 10-7, which they're projected to have a losing record this year, so they should throw more this year than they did last year. And he kind of ran pretty bad on touchdowns. He only caught 3 touchdowns. So we think Metcalf can step into this, kind of Pickens-esque role here and see a bit more volume, run a bit hotter in terms of touchdowns, and is just a more talented wide receiver, and that the market is overplaying, the quarterback concerns.
I have a sticky note on my computer here while I'm drafting Herzig with all the offensive coordinators that I hate, and Arthur Smith is one of them. And so us being so far ahead of market on DK Metcalf has honestly made me uncomfortable just on the offensive coordinator stuff. And if Aaron Rodgers signs, I will feel better about this. But just on the Arthur Smith stuff, Herzig, how are you thinking about DK Metcalf?
Yeah, I mean, Arthur Smith, question mark. Who's the quarterback? Question mark. All these rumors about bringing in more competition? Question mark. This is why the market is dropping him. This is one where I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to push the noise out and just kind of trust the projections, because all the reasons that we're discussing, those are the reasons why his ADP is driving that, almost a round difference from what we have. So I'm fine with taking him. Not someone that I'm completely stacking because, hey, they also play Cleveland in week 17, which I'm not going to completely overreact to defenses, but it's still a pretty good defense there. But yeah, someone I'm grabbing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of rumors lately that, as Herzig mentioned, Steelers are looking to add a pass-catching weapon. There's just not going to be a lot out there. One that I thought maybe was Amari Cooper. Like, it wouldn't shock me if the Steelers maybe were interested in him at some point, but we'll see. There's been no word on Amari Cooper whatsoever this entire offseason. Let's go to one of Leone's favorites, seemingly on an annual basis here, Kenneth Walker. We were at 49 overall on DraftKings. ADP is 57.5. The yards per carry really dipped last year to 3.7 last year. I don't think that's sticky year over year, but man, the reason that I was so excited about Kenneth Walker early last year is because he seemingly flipped a switch on the pass catching stuff. 46 catches in 12 games last year for Kenneth Walker. Now, I don't know how sticky that is with Geno gone and Sam Darnold in, but Leone, it seems like we're always a bit high here on Kenneth Walker. Thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think, he's someone that is a volatile rusher. You saw it last year. He's not going to be a high success rate guy. He didn't break off the long runs last year, which led to a really kind of abysmal yards per carry. But if you listen to the team talk about him, we were high on him last year because the team, even though the market was like, you're worried about Zach Charbonnet, the coaches were talking about Kenneth Walker very positively, glowingly. We've seen the same thing this offseason. And you mentioned the receiving stuff, 13% target share last year. He is going kind of meaningfully later than Kyren Williams, Joe Mixon, and he has more pass catching built in, and he probably has more home run upside in terms of rushing the football. Will we see it? I don't know. We went through this with DeAndre Swift. We thought he had it, and it's been a mixed bag in terms of a running back like that, whether that explosiveness we saw the rookie year is sticky or not. But we think there is an element of stickiness there, making him, a better running back cost in the first 6 rounds than a couple of these other guys that catch less passes.
Well, and for best ball specifically, I don't know if he's going to hit them, but Kenneth Walker's trying to hit home runs, right? Like, he's trying actively to be like, well, God, let me bounce this outside and try to hit a 60-yard bomb right here. And that profiles, I guess, pretty well in best ball, though I think people overrate that aspect of it. I do like Kenneth Walker, though, in this middle rounds. As Leone said, Herzig, he's going pretty late here. I mean, he's going like James Conner, Travion Henderson, Kamara, Chuba Hubbard. He's kind of going in that tier. What do you think about Kenneth Walker this year, Herzig?
Yeah, I mean, and you were talking about offensive coordinators. I think the big change here is that you've got Clint Kubiak coming in with the outside zone scheme, and they've specifically already said, they're going to be asking a lot of Kenneth Walker, and that includes in the passing game. And so I think we're going to see those continued usage in the receptions. I'm buying a lot of Kenneth Walker. I'm also buying a lot of Charps because this is more of me making a bet on this ground game. Now, that's still some receptions from a passing style, but this running game is what I want a lot of.
Yeah. When you take Walker, do you take Sharps, or are you taking them on different teams, I think?
It's a little too expensive to be buying into both of them, in my opinion. If I'm getting ADP value, I'm not going to say no, but in general, different teams.
Yep. Okay. Let's go to number 8 here. Joe Mixon. We're at 54 overall. ADP is 43.4. God, I'm kind of tired of fading Joe Mixon, but man, he's hard to watch at times with the efficiency stuff, but coaches love giving this guy volume. Throughout his whole career, averaging 16.3 carries, 2.9 catches per game. I mean, coaches want to give this guy the ball 18, 19, 20, 25 times a game. He's 29 years old now. They have done an offensive line complete overhaul. At some point, though, God, it's just like the volume is good and the efficiency is so scary. How are we handling that, Leone, on the projection side? And any more thoughts on Mixon?
Yeah, I think Mixon is in this range where when we talked about Kyron, Herzig made the point of like the most likely outcome is these guys beat value a little bit, but they don't have this huge ceiling. And there's a little bit of risk that's like hard to quantify, especially when it doesn't come to fruition in previous seasons. But we really want to be careful with these guys that are so volume dependent, particularly in the rushing department. The team total for Houston this year is kind of middle of the pack. The spread's middle of the pack. If things go south for them, that could be rough for Mixon, who's dependent on those touchdowns repeating themselves from a year ago and getting a ton of those carries to rack up rushing yards without efficiency. He has not averaged more than 4.1 yards per carry since his second year in the league, which was in 2018. So maybe the new OL stuff, helps with Houston, but it's been a long time. He only had a 10% target share. That's 3 points less than Kenneth Walker, and we have some reasons with them drafting Woody Marks and other things to think that could even dip further this year.
Yeah, God, he's like he hasn't been that great throughout his entire career, but he just keeps getting the ball. Anyways, Herzig, what do you think about Joe Mixon?
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like we've seen his upside, especially on a site like DraftKings, and it's volume dependent. Like I know we don't really have that like RB dead zone because for the most part, a lot of them have dropped, but his ADP is 43. Like that is as dead zone as you can get for someone who just doesn't have like right now the talent or the efficiency, really isn't used that much in the passing game. The team doesn't really want to use their running backs that way in the passing game. And yeah, Woody Marks comes in who profiles more as a pass catcher. So if there was some of that, then that pie's gotten smaller.
Yeah. A new offensive coordinator this year also for the Texans, Bobby Slowick out. The new offensive coordinator is from the Rams. From the Sean McVay tree. So maybe some effect there. We've seen these huge volume games from Kyron also, but yeah. All right. One spot we've been ahead, or one of the biggest spots we've been ahead pretty much this entire best ball process has been Saints wide receiver. Chris Olave, we're at 59 overall. ADP is around 75 on DraftKings. Shaheed, we're at 103 overall. ADP is 129.2. To me, the Olave bet is like easy. He's posted 2.07 yards per route run or better in all three of his NFL seasons. Insane. Now, is there more risk with Olave? Because if he gets a concussion, he's probably going to miss a lot of time. And, it sucks to talk about it. It's scary, but it is what it is. He is more at risk to miss more time from a single concussion than I think someone who has not had a history of concussions before. So that's a risk. And then other people are going to say, well, Tyler Shuck sucks. That's like the narrative out there among the tape bros, a lot of tape bros. Tyler Shuck is like incapable of getting these guys the ball. Leone, what do you think about us being so far ahead on Olave and Shaheed?
Yeah, I know we don't have the concussion stuff really baked in. If you find that to be a meaningful concern, then we're probably a little bit hot. I still think at ADP, he'd be worth the risk. You mentioned with the yards per out run stuff, there just aren't very many players with this talent level available at this point in the draft. And at some point, you just want to bet on the talent and hope the situation can overcome. And similar to the Pittsburgh spot, I think people might be like double counting the quarterback situation. We do get a team that's playing in a dome with a head coach that has been a very capable offensive coordinator that runs at a pretty up tempo, and a team that probably going to have to throw the ball a decent bit, isn't going to have a rushing QB back there. And two very efficient wide receivers. We might be a little hot on their overall touchdowns, and we might bake in some of that risk that'll drop them closer to ADP, but we'll still be above on both players. Shaheed, too, in the point he goes in the draft. I agree with you when you were talking about the home runs with Kenneth Walker being good for best ball, and people sometimes overrate the quote-unquote better in best ball. There are some exceptions. I think Rashid Shaheed may be an exception here where his spike weeks can really particularly with the 100-yard bonus, make a really big impact on a given week with his downfield ability. He was also at 2.2 yards per out run last season. So Just buying 2 wide receivers that have been efficient, but have had things go against them that have been somewhat outside of their control.
Yeah. The Shaheed one, like, he has been so good on deep balls. But I looked at what we have, and we are baking in regression for him on the deep balls. Like, we're not expecting him to catch 50-yard bombs at the same rate that he has been. And he's still projecting way above ADP. Herzig, what do you think about Saints wide receiver stuff?
Yeah, and I think this is another example where it's like, hey, is there a non-projected factor, a best ball factor that's coming in that's, decreasing their values in the market? And I think I believe so. Like, nobody really wants to draft them, because if you're thinking about stacking, now you're going to draft Tyler Shuck at the end of drafts, like, when we don't actually know if he truly is the starter. In an 18-round format, I don't probably want to be wasting a QB pick on Tyler Shuck. If we're talking DraftKings, maybe, DraftKings with that 20, okay, yeah, there's a little better there. But I still think, like, people just aren't comfortable enough to be targeting a guy who you don't love the QB. And then when we think about, like, who they had QBs in the past, like, come on, Derek Carr, like, yeah, Tyler Shuck might be a downgrade, but, like, is it really that much of a downgrade from what we've seen in the past? Plus, there's actually that opportunity of maybe he's actually efficient. Maybe he's actually, they're able to kind of reel him in. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to trust my own kind of analysis from a rookie perspective for QBs, but we do have the dome factor. We do have minimal other wide receiver competition. Brandon Cooks is the number 3 there. Then you're getting into, like, guys like Bub Means. Like, we know that Olave and Shaheed are going to be out there in 2 wide receiver sets. They're going to get the volume in a dome. Not a great defense. They're going to be throwing. Like, there's a lot of things to like.
For sure. Schedule is good as well. Week 15 to 17, home versus Panthers in the dome, home versus Jets in the dome, at Titans there in championship week. And yeah, you get to play the Bucks twice. You get to play the Falcons twice. You get to play the Panthers twice. So yeah, pretty cheap here on Saints wide receivers. Underdog specific one, David Montgomery, we're at 59. Overall, an underdog ADP is 70.4. I think just an easy explanation here, Leone, touchdowns. David Montgomery was 5th in the NFL in carries from inside the 5-yard line last season. Even though he missed 3 games, he was also 4th in that category in 2023. So seemingly every year people underrate the impact of David Montgomery's touchdowns on a format like underdog. I believe we're more in line on DraftKings on David Montgomery, maybe a little bit hot on him versus ADP. But yeah, Leone, what do you think about Mr. Montgomery?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously baking in a lot of regression for the Lions offense just naturally because they scored so much last year, and also losing Ben Johnson to Chicago could be a big deal. But even with that, we have Montgomery ranked as RB22. He finished last year in half PPR points per game among wide receivers and running backs as the 18th best player in points per game in half PPR. That's higher than just our pure running back rank this year. So I think the market's just sometimes sour on these older kind of seemingly boring players. But I think it's important to note that he did this with Jahmyr Gibbs playing all 17 games. There's still some upside for Montgomery if Gibbs gets hurt and something happens to him. So for me, when I can make a bet where the player can pay off their cost without an injury and then has upside beyond that, I'm definitely, going to be buying.
Yeah, what do you think about Montgomery on DraftKings specifically, Herzig? Because he's a much tougher bet there, I think, given the way he's used.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leone touched, hit the nail on the head. Like, he was RB13 points per game when Gibbs was fully healthy the entire year. We have a player who can probably surpass his actual cost even when Gibbs is fully healthy. Then you have that contingency, and it's not like David Montgomery can't catch passes. Remember that stretch that he had? Was it with mind blank, but maybe Chicago?
Yeah.
Where it was like a 6-week stretch where he was RB1 almost weekly, and he's catching passes. It's not the most efficient when you have Jahmyr Gibbs there. But if Jahmyr Gibbs were to go down, yeah, I think he ends up being an absolute, top 5, top 7, probably top 7, top 8 projected running back each week. So love that aspect. And then, I mean, I think DraftKings, I think it's still fine.
Yeah. Okay. Number 11 is just a concept that I wanted to touch on here. We find ourselves, when the market gets excited about pocket passers too much, we find ourselves with really big fades. And this was the case on CJ Stroud last year. Not that we expected CJ Stroud to faceplant as bad as he did, but it was really hard to get there where the market was taking CJ Stroud when you don't have any rushing. Joe Burrow, we were at 60th overall on DraftKings. ADP is 44.8. Leone, what do you think about, I mean, God, he's going to need And he was insane last year. He's going to have to be absolutely insane again to pay this off from both volume and touchdown efficiency perspective on Joe Burrow. What do you think about him and just pocket passers in general?
Yeah, there's so much opportunity cost here that I don't really think you can justify it. I know sometimes where Jamar Chase and T. Higgins get drafted, then people want to reach for that stack and it compounds thing. But Burrow, from a fantasy perspective, ran kind of pure last year. They found themselves in a lot of desperation spots where they were, they were throwing and they have the talent to overcome that, which is a good thing for a ceiling, but I don't think we should count on it to duplicate again. I will note, and maybe this happens more on Underdog than DraftKings, but sometimes you get some variance on Joe Burrow where if you've taken Higgins or Chase, if the person who took the other wide receiver just doesn't want to take Burrow, he can last very far past ADP. And so you still have a chance to get him and complete that stack at a really good price, at a price most, drafts aren't getting him. And I'd be fine, pulling him at 60 or whatever, depending on how, it aligns in the snake draft. But yeah, at 44 on a full PPR site, it's just really difficult to see him absolutely, torching you.
Yeah, exactly. And God, he's going very high for someone to try to compete with the rushing quarterbacks. It's going to be really tough. However, we've seen, especially with the 300-yard bonus, Herzig, we've seen Burrow certainly have some huge games. This is like a best ball game theory question, I feel like, because Chase and T. Higgins and Chase Brown all go so high. How are you handling the Burrow stuff right now, Herzig?
Yeah, I mean, come on, ETR subscribers. Like, if you're drafting on DraftKings, at least wait until the 5th round. Like, ADP 45 means you're not even waiting until the turn for it to come back because you're scared that Jamar Chase drafter is going to take him. And our rank is at 60, and that includes an ADP baked in. So if you were just talking raw projections, we're actually probably like 3 rounds plus past what he actually should be. And the only reason that he's going with this 44.8 is because, if you look at the actual game logs, and you can so easily do it on DraftKings by just clicking in, you just see tons and tons of high numbers because, he hit that volume, and it's so hard for that to happen year over year because it depends on defense, it depends on health and all that. But he just shouldn't be in this range. But the T. Higgins, the Jamar Chase, the Chase Brown drafters, they're all fighting over him. And if you're doing it for stacking, guess what? You can still very easily win without having Joe Burrow to pair with your Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those are guys who can produce enough volume, have enough of an outlier game on their own that you can focus on stacking with your other QBs elsewhere. And we've seen that stacking actually is more likely to bring up your more middling wide receivers to outperform their value than the elite ones that are already being drafted at their elite potential.
Yeah. And I feel like the market's handling other pocket passers correctly, right? Like Stroud goes really late. Trevor Lawrence goes really late. Matthew Stafford goes really late. But where the market has just gotten out of control is seemingly only on Burrow amongst the pocket passers.
I think with the pocket passers, like every year, it's just chasing the previous year's stats. Yeah. That's what happens with the pocket passers. You see, if you look at year over year, the rushing quarterbacks kind of stay where they are. The pocket passers are a revolution because people are just chasing what happened last year.
Yeah. And God, Justin Fields goes 50 plus spots after Joe Burrow on a week-to-week basis. We're going to have Justin Fields projected for a lot of fantasy points, man. I can tell on a week-to-week basis, I can tell you right now, just because we're going to have him for a lot of rushing and a lot of rushing touchdowns. All right. RJ Harvey, rookie running back, Broncos. We are at 63 overall on DraftKings. On DraftKings, a lot of times rookies last longer, but here, RJ Harvey is going 50.6 overall on DraftKings. Now, I want to be in on RJ Harvey, Leone. I think Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime are if those guys are out of the NFL in a couple years, I would not be shocked. I also want to be in on Sean Payton running backs because they're going to catch passes. No worse than 6th in running back target rate in any year that Sean Payton has coached. But man, this is expensive. 50.6 overall on RJ Harvey. Leone, any thoughts on, I don't even know if we can get any higher on him.
Yeah, I do think we could get higher on him. We've got 8% target share, about 47% of the team's carries. It really just comes down to, you're not worried. You're right. You're not worried about one of these guys taking the job from RJ Harvey. What you're worried about is the amalgamation of all these guys, the collection of these guys, just everybody playing their own little bit of role. And that prevents Harvey from having this true workhorse role. That's sort of where our concern lies. If you think he can get a workhorse role, he can pay off this ADP. So I can't say I come in with a ton of confidence here, especially, again, that 8% target share that we're assuming. You can definitely see where if he's a full-time player, it's going to get in the double digits, and all of a sudden he looks a lot better. It is interesting to have a rookie like this that seems like the I guess, the analytics nerds and the casuals are both in on so much. But he goes a full round earlier than Travion Henderson, who was a better prospect and went almost a full round earlier, beginning of the second round compared to end of the second round. So I'd rather have Henderson at cost, and we have Henderson ranked ahead outright. But if you wanted to get some Harvey, again, not as much conviction in this one as some of the other spots we've talked about.
Well, and one thing is that they've already expressed concern about his pass protection. I do not think that on like 3rd and 10, RJ Harvey's going to be on the field, and that hurts. I do think that he can still catch a lot of passes, only playing on 1st and 2nd down. But that's one reason that we have his target share down there at 8% is because, again, 2-minute drill, 4-minute drill, 3rd and 8 plus. I don't think RJ Harvey's going to be out there for the Broncos. So, yeah. That's why I said I think it might be a little bit tough for us to get much higher on him. Let's go to Chris Godwin. We're at 75 overall. ADP is 66.1. I mean, Chris Godwin was insane last season before dislocating his ankle in garbage time in week 7. He was averaging 7.1 catches, 82.2 yards, 0.7 touchdowns per game. Just wild production. Since then, dislocates his ankle. Team drafts Emeka Egbuka in round 1. I will say that on the ankle stuff, just 2 months ago, Bucks gave him $44 million guaranteed. It would surprise me if they weren't optimistic about his health, given that contract. So I'm a little uncomfortable here being behind ADP on Chris Godwin, Leone. But from a math perspective, I can start to see it where you give Jalen McMillan share, you give Egbuka share, you give Cade Otton share, you give Rashad White share, you give Bucky Irving pass share, and next thing you know, it's hard to get there on Chris Godwin. But this was one that I've kind of been IKBing a little bit so far. Leone, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we're admittedly being a little conservative on a guy early in the offseason coming back from injury. It's just spots like that in the past, sometimes maybe we haven't been as proactive there and gotten a little bit burned being aggressive on these injury guys. That's more of the concern, I think, than Egbuka. If Egbuka is really good and Godwin's healthy, it's bad news for Jalen McMillan, I think, more than anyone. So if you feel good about Godwin's health, I have no problems taking him at ADP. It's just kind of a systemic approach to being a little conservative on these guys coming back from a serious injury.
Yep, for sure. And he's not the youngest guy in the world either. So I think that's totally valid. Herzig, any Godwin thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a tough player because we know that upside. We saw it so recently, but there's also so much working against him. Obviously, you have that injury, but I think I have a little different take than Leone on the Egbuka situation because it's not that I directly think he's going to be hurting. He's going to hurt McMillan more than Godwin from a volume, but he primarily played slot in college. And Godwin, last year was the first year we saw him return back to that slot, and that was also with Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen's gone. Like, isn't there a chance that even if Godwin, maybe slow start because of the injury, they keep him outside and Egbuka, after playing so much, thriving in the slot at Ohio State, they have him in that slot role? And from a football offense wise, that might actually be what's best for the Bucs. But from a fantasy production, if Godwin's not in the slot, any dreams we have of what happened last year are completely out the window. Yep. So he's a guy that I can so easily see him being a top 5 wide receiver because we just saw it. But also when you combine the Egbuka situation, the injury, Liam Cohen gone, the slot, there's a lot of question marks.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair.
They're not the same player, but this is a little bit of an aside, but I get some vibes on how we're treating Emeka Egbuka, like how we treated Justin Jefferson as a rookie, which is kind of like this high floor, but not real high ceiling slot guy. They're very comparable size-wise. I'm just to say, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Egbuka with the ability to play outside. And even aside from the Godwin stuff, just from a ceiling perspective, for those playing Dynasty or even year one for best ball, him be able to hit a higher ceiling than is maybe kind of attributed to him.
I'll throw in there. This is one player that I really want to pay attention to in August because where is Egbuka lining up? What is Chris Godwin's injury, status? If if things are looking good, this is someone that we could probably take all the way into like the 4th round or so. But right now, there's just too many question marks.
There you have it. Leone says that Emeka Egbuka will be the next Justin Jefferson. Okay, let's go to Brock Purdy. We're way ahead here. 81 overall. ADP is 106. I like being ahead on Brock Purdy. Defense on paper for the 49ers is like bad. I think people think of all the talent that the 49ers have had on defense. They've gutted a lot of it. Like, this could easily be a bottom 10 unit, which I think would be good for Purdy. And then his weaponry is strong. I know they lost Debo, but CMC, Kittle, Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, Pearsall, who we'll get to. I think pretty good weaponry. So I like being ahead on Purdy. I see no reason the market should be so low on him. Leone, any more thoughts on Mr. Purdy?
Yeah, I mean, we saw him last year be able to be successful in less than ideal circumstances with poor O-line play, with CMC issues. So we saw him kind of carry the load. We also saw, in terms of his passing statistics, shift from a bunch of stuff that was all yak related, which people are giving him trouble for, to converting a ton of air yards last year. So I think he deserves some praise in that regard. And when you're an offense like Shanahan's that's going to score, but the team overall is maybe not as strong as past years, it's a good combination for him. But it's a little bit tricky to stack where we have guys ranked. I do like Kittle a little bit better than we have him ranked. But that's kind of the only hiccup there is on DraftKings. Purdy's efficiency is a lot of why we have him ranked well, but that efficiency doesn't necessarily relate to catch volume for the pass catchers. And thus, we're not equally as high on the pass catchers relative to ADP, and the stacking gets kind of weird.
Also showed a rushing ceiling last year in 15 games, 323 rush yards, 5 touchdowns last year for Brock Purdy. Let's go to Jaylen Warren. This is one that I'm like a Jaylen Warren guy. People are like making fun of me in the YouTube comments repeatedly about being a Jaylen Warren guy. And now we are at 84 overall. ADP is 101.3. It really comes down to, in my opinion, how much you think Caleb Johnson is going to take of the Najee Harris role. If Caleb Johnson goes for the full Najee Harris role and Jaylen Warren just stays in his 9-10 touches per game and loses a lot of the goal line work or all the goal line work, that's not great. But if Caleb Johnson has more of a round 3 rookie, not as much as Najee played role, then I do like Jaylen Warren, especially if Aaron Rodgers signs here. Leone, what do you think about the Steelers backfield?
You hit the nail on the head. Does he take over the Najee role or not? We don't have him doing that as a round 3 rookie running back. We have him with about 210 carries, which we lean conservative in general. But Najee playing full seasons has been like 260-ish carries the last 3 years. Now he's played full seasons. Keep that in mind. He's been extremely durable. Other running backs were baking in some injury risk and whatnot. But that results in us being pretty high in terms of Jaylen Warren's carries compared to what he's done historically. So there's some push and pull. Do they spell him more with Gainwell and CPAT, or does Caleb take over more than that? But Warren is likely to be, the better pass catcher of the mix, and this team is more likely to be in a more negative game script situation this year than they were at times last year.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers historically has been good for running backs in terms of getting them touchdowns, getting them receptions. Herzig, any thoughts on Steelers backfield right now?
Yeah, Jaylen Warren's probably one of my most drafted players right now. For me, the data on third-round running backs is quite bad in that rookie year. They have less than a 20% success rate. Now, a lot of them go on to become good running backs, but if you look at the data, like, it takes time, and it's usually not in that first year. And this isn't one where, they're performing well and they're coming to playoffs wise. The data doesn't show that. And so for me, when I see that Caleb Johnson is actually being drafted ahead of Jaylen Warren, like, I get it. You're betting Caleb Johnson, but you're doing that for the upside. You're bowling that for that 20% that he actually has the home run. And then, yes, you are far surpassing your value. But what happens in the other 80% of the time? Jaylen Warren is a great pick, great value. If I'm doing a 0 RB, if I'm doing a hero RB, he's in a part of the draft where I think the wide receivers kind of start to fall off. I'm not too excited to reach on a tight end at that spot. I have so much Jaylen Warren.
All right. Let's go to Michael Pittman. I gave my take on Market Monday under the Tyler Warren section on all of the Colts guys. You can listen to that, but we have been ahead on Pittman and Downs by a lot this entire process. Leone, obviously people do not want to take these guys because of the quarterback situation, either Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson. Any more thoughts on Pittman and Downs being so far ahead on them?
Yeah, I was talking with Jack Miller of our projections team about this, and Pittman was fighting through injuries last year, still got a 23% target share. We're only projecting 19%, being a little bit conservative and accounting for Tyler Warren's addition to the offense, taking some stuff. But both Pittman and Downs should still see, a very concentrated target tree. If you get 17 games from Anthony Richardson, we're probably a little bit too high, given how that might play out. If you get 17 games of Danny Dimes, we're probably too low on where we have them. So given that mix, we feel good about being ahead of ADP. I think Pittman in particular, people aren't giving him just enough credit, the volume that he's commanded when he's been on the field the last couple of seasons, especially if you're willing to write off a little bit of last year due to the issues he had with his back.
Yeah, I mean, Pittman has averaged 5.2 catches per game in a 5-year career. That's really good. Like Pittman, Downs, and Warren, Tyler Warren's, to me, are just good players, so I'm willing to close my eyes on about the quarterback situation and bet on them because they are so discounted. Let's go to JJ McCarthy. We're at 109 overall. ADP is 125. I think this is a pretty easy one. Kevin O'Connell has done it with Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, Josh Dobbs. When you're in the dome, in this scheme, with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, you're going to put up numbers. And so I like betting on JJ McCarthy. I don't think this is very complicated. Leone, anything to add on JJ McCarthy?
Yeah, I mean, we saw a tweet about JJ McCarthy and his touchdown prop line being higher than, a lot of the quarterbacks that are going ahead of him. And I think sometimes the market at quarterback in particular is a little bit scared of what they haven't seen before. But he was someone they took really early. He's not a true rookie in a lot of senses, and it's an offense that has multiple really strong pass catchers, one absolute superstar, really good offensive coordinator. They play in a dome. They play against other teams that play in domes. There's just a lot of things that are supporting him, and he's pretty stackable and very easy to stack where we have some of his pass catchers ranked.
Agreed. Herzig, anything to add here on the JJ McCarthy spot?
Yeah, you guys touched on a lot of things, but I'm going to simplify it as much as possible. Sam Darnold was QB8 last year. That's Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
JJ McCarthy, first round draft pick. He's being drafted as QB19. Come on.
Yep. All right. Let's go to Ricky Pearsall. We're at 111 overall. ADP is 83. I mean, I hate having like full fade on Ricky Pearsall, like second year wide receiver who I thought showed some decent things on his limited opportunities last year. But 83 overall is very steep for a player who is competing with Juwan Jennings, who was awesome last year. Brandon Ayuk should be back relatively early as a baller. Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. So I get it. But at the same time, I'm a little bit uncomfortable being like totally out on Pearsall because things could really break his way if Ayuk rehab doesn't go as well or Jennings turns into a pumpkin, etc. Leone, what do you think about being so far behind, like 30 spots behind on Pearsall?
Yeah, it's a bit scary as someone who was like a year 2 wide receiver. Those are the types of receivers you like to bet on to break out, had solid draft capital the year prior. He was a risky prospect though, and I'm looking at his data. I don't know if there's enough there to have us like shift a ton on where he was as a prospect. From a pure volume standpoint, obviously, recovering from the gunshot wound took some time to get on the field, and then it was just hard to crack the lineup. But still, the raw numbers, I mean, he only saw 46 targets. He was at a below average 17% targets per route run on those. He was okay, 1.45 yards per route run, solid 8.7 yards per target. But there's nothing there that screams like either he commanded a lot of volume or he was insanely efficient with the volume he got. So it's tough for me to pay this price tag, given that, you can squint and see it a little bit, but I think especially on a full PPR site, it's just unlikely he can pay off this tag.
Okay. Let's group these three guys together. All rookies, all day 2 picks. Luther Burden, we are pretty far behind on. Jaden Higgins, we are pretty far behind on. Kyle Williams, especially on underdog, we are really far behind on. I'll just give my take on it. Usage for these guys. I expect Jaden Higgins to start opposite Nico Collins right away. I expect Luther Burden to play, but only in 3 wide receiver sets. I don't think he's going to take over for Rome or DJ Moore. And Kyle Williams, I think he's going to play a lot, but he still has to climb over Pop Douglas, who's been somewhat productive in the NFL already, and Mac Hollins, who coaches love to put on the field. So I'm getting much of these guys little bit scary because I know everybody loves rookie wide receivers. Leone, how are you thinking about these day 2 wideouts?
Yeah, it's tricky because we have seen this range of players pay off in a big way in the past. But I think they're being all individually thrust up a little bit more than their draft capital merits, especially like you look at Kyle Williams. Hayden Winks tweeted something along the lines of him being, the highest ADP ever on a third round wide receiver with a team that has like a 7.5 win total. Like, I think we've just gone a little bit too far trying to buy in to the rookie upside here. Now, when I'm building my teams, I like to consider the archetypes of the wide receiver room I have. If I've got 5 to 6 solid wide receivers, I might be in a position where I'm willing to ignore our rank and take one of these rookie wide receivers at ADP just because I want to get that archetype in my room in some ways. But right now, I'm going to be pretty underweight the trio of them.
Yeah. How do you feel, Herzig, about being underweight these day 2 rookie wide receivers?
Yeah, I think people are, we think of upside and we just think of what's the best case scenario that could happen. And then we envision, okay, we're drafting and we're hoping that we're right, and not really considering what is the likelihood of that. And then also considering what are the kind of losses, the misses. Yeah. And I think for this right now, the market very, hey, rookie loving, just driving forward that way too much for, hey, this is what could happen with that upside. And I think Leone and the team have done some research on this that we're likely to see this type of rookie fall as the summer goes on. So yeah, I don't want to be left with none, but I'm more hoping to pack my bags with these types come August.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point about these guys will go later as we get into August and September. A couple more quick ones here I want to hit. I have to get Leone's homer take on Dalton Kincaid. We are at 123 overall. ADP is 136. I got burned pretty bad by Kincaid last year. I had like equal amount of, I had a lot of both of McBride and Kincaid, but God, if I would have gone like all McBride there, that would have been pure sex. But I'm worried the Bills like don't love Kincaid. They don't love him as a blocker. They ask him to get stronger. It's like he can only play 60% of the snaps or so if he can't be on the field for blocking. So how do you feel about being a bit ahead here on Dalton Kincaid for your Bills, Leone?
Yeah, I think your concerns are warranted and really baked into the cost. Like, Dawson Knox is going to play. He's going to play some by the goal line. It's tough for that type of situation for a part-time tight end. But the cost has dropped so much, I think people are ignoring the upside, which is, the 27% target per route run, despite arguably not being very healthy for most of the season. He did that with an 8-yard ADOT. There's no other tight end in the league that even comes close in terms of that combination of ADOT and targets per route run. Now, I'm cherry picking a little bit because he's not going to see the field as much as some of the other guys around him. But that's a really good combination that to me does point to there being upside if the route share just doesn't unfold the way that it most likely does, which is like he's okay. And I think the costs on these mid-round tight ends, you can include Dallas Goedert in there, have just gotten pretty cheap, especially on Underdog, a half PPR site where you can take them now where you can make 3 tight end teams pretty easily with these guys. Or, and when in years past, if they're a round or 2 more expensive, you would have to be doing 2 tight end teams with them. So they're pretty appealing to me.
Yeah, I prefer Goedert to Kincaid. I just think Goedert is like a good NFL player and has shown that. And I end up with 3 tight end rooms that are like Goedert, Njoku, Tyler Warren, or Goedert, Njoku, Colston Loveland. And I like those 3 tight end rooms. And if you like Kincaid, you can certainly include him in there as well. All right. This was fun. Hopefully it was a good exercise to get you guys to think about how or why we are ahead or below market on these guys. Obviously, like, we are regressing a little bit to the market, but our ranks would have no value if they were just straight ADP. And it's important to try to take stands somewhere along the line here on players that you/we feel strongly about. You can always check out our continuously updating rankings on the site in the Best Ball tab if you are a Best Ball subscriber. For Leone, for Herzig, the king of all Rolling Stones, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.